Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Hope everyone enjoyed the start of the Overwatch League season yesterday. But today we're going to talk about the other big Overwatch esports event going on this year, which is of course the World Cup. I've already made a couple of videos on the World Cup in terms of some of the stuff we know, but now we have the majority of the rosters in place for the 2023 World Cup. So we're going to start doing some content here. My goal is to try to do one video for each of these 6 groups. Depending on timing, that could change, obviously. But I'm going to start right now with the group that we have all of the teams for, one of the only groups that we have all of the teams for, and all the rosters for, and that is the Europe and Middle East Conference A. This is the A group for the Europe and Middle Eastern Conference. Very interesting group. There is, of course, also some wildcard teams in this group. I'm going to talk about those as well. This video is going to be a little bit more kind of casual than the really in-depth, intense roster breakdowns that I usually do with the Overwatch League. Don't expect anything as kind of set in stone and firm in terms of like just the way of breaking it down as that video is. It's not going to be like that, but it is going to be a kind of go through each of the teams, talk about some of their players and whatnot we can kind of make from them. And then I'm going to give you my overall thoughts on the teams and who I think is going to move on from the group. This is a group that has 3 teams moving on from it. So very interesting group, a lot of really good teams. So let's just jump in, let's dive in, and let's start talking about it. This group, of course, EMEC A, you have Belgium, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain automatically in this group, plus the 3 wildcard teams of Denmark, Ireland, and Portugal, 2 of which will move on to play in the main Group A. So there will be 8 teams fighting for 3 spots when all is said and done. So we're going to start and just go in order of how they're listed here on Wikipedia. Just going through the rosters, talking about the players, whatnot, like I said. So let's start with the first team, which is Belgium. Belgium, of course, most known for having Logix on the team. He's one of the big kind of players from the history of the Overwatch scene. So he is on this team, but he is joined by Ken, Stain, Skytor, Shira, Podonova, and Chaba. Those first 3, Logix, Ken, and Stain being your damage dealers, Skytor and Shira being your tanks, and Podonova and Chaba as your supports. They did have to have Stain come in to replace a player by the name of Cathanis, because Cathanis injured themselves. So there's a possibility if they do advance to the main event that switch could happen again. But that's kind of who we're looking at here. A lot of kind of lesser known players on this team. Logix is the main one, of course, that you guys all most likely know. Ken is a guy who's currently playing on Raspberry Racers. He's a flex DPS player, mostly. He plays a lot of different flexible kind of heroes. Then you have Skytor, the tank, who is on the team Stop Toxicity. You know, not a huge team there. This is an interesting roster. I think it's a lot of... It's always nice to kind of see teams. Part of why I love the World Cup is because you get a lot of guys on these teams and a lot of players who are from a variety of backgrounds who aren't necessarily all household names for people in the Overwatch scene, right? Like a lot of these people are people who play on ladder. They maybe don't play on teams because they have other jobs or whatever. They are, you know, university students, whatever it may be. So this is an example of a team where you don't have a ton of players with rich Overwatch history, but they always can surprise you, especially when you have players who are known entities like Logix. So this is a team that I certainly think is a good team, just based on kind of the talent they have. They don't have the big names that some of the other teams have, and some of the ones we're going to talk about next are really, really, really big in terms of their personalities and kind of who's on them. But this is an interesting team, and I do think they have a pretty good chance to do something, but it's a tough group. And so one of the interesting ones. But Belgium is a team that I'm very interested to see, just to see kind of what Logix is able to do. And kind of what the team around him is able to do. I definitely think they're not expected to move on from this group, but they're not, in my opinion, a weak team by any means. They just have They have a really good star player, and sometimes that is enough to really kind of help elevate you. But when we go to the next team, which is Team France, this is a team full of a lot of really big names, tons of really talented players. So we can go through here, look at the roster. You can see they have a damage trio of Avo, Nico, GDH, and Pac. Their tanks are Ben Best and Poco. Poco's back, baby, and then supports FD God and Reviews. I'd say one of the somewhat surprises here to me is Reviews being on this roster over Zarian. I thought Zarian looked very good when we saw him in contenders and stuff like that, but Reviews is the guy they choose over him. Someone playing on Shoes Money Crew EU alongside Pac or Pac as well. So some kind of people who've played together there. You have Ben Beth and FD God, who of course are right now on the Washington Justice together. Poco, who just retired from the Overwatch League but makes his grand return to the World Cup, which I'm not surprised. I kind of expected him to play. I think the World Cup is an event where a lot of people who have kind of moved on from the league often come back just because it's easier to kind of commit to one tournament for a year as opposed to an entire season. So usually that's why a lot of people come back. But this is a team with a lot of big Overwatch League names on it, people who've been in the Overwatch League, right? Ben Best and FD God are there right now. Poco just retired from the league. Nico GDH was in the league. You have guys who are names and contenders. Obviously, Avo is on Team Peps. Like I said before, Pac and Reviews are on Shoes Money Crew EU. So this is a team with a lot of really big name talent, right? This is a team that finished 4th in the 2019 World Cup. First team to ever beat South Korea in a World Cup match. So this is a really big name roster. They should be one of the favorites to get out of this group. They're very, very talented, very deep in terms of what they're able to do. Lots of really good players on this roster. I would not be surprised if they walk out of this group as the top team. I think they're very, very good. They have a lot of kind of flexibility. They're a very well-coached team. Get Amazed is coaching this team, unsurprisingly. So I do expect this team to be one of the ones we see in the top 16. Absolutely. I think they're very, very good. I think they're one of the top teams in the world, and I think that they certainly have a very high chance of moving on to be that kind of top-level team. Moving on now to Team United Kingdom. This is a very interesting team. You can take a look at it here. You can see they have a DPS trio of Backbone, W, Maimone, and Kai. They have a tank line of Jakaru 19 and Smex, and then supports Cronus and Funny Astro. So the big surprise for me on this roster is Cronus over Abik. Abik is a player who I am very high on. I think he's a very good player. We've seen him play very well in contenders recently. I think he's a really, really good player. And he's a strong flex support player. Cronus is not really as known for being a flex support player in the same way that Abik is. So that's why I'm a little surprised by the choice to bring Cronus in. But you look across this roster, you have 3 Overwatch League players with Funny Astro, Kai, and Backbone. No surprise there that they made this roster. I absolutely expected all of them to be on this team. You have W. Maimone, very good DPS player for Ex-Oblivion. You have Jakaru, who is on Wisp with Abik, so him not being there, a little more surprising for that reason as well. And then Smex has been on Team UK in the past. He was on the team in 2017, in 2018, and in 2019. And then you have Cronus, who is on Team Peps right now. I believe he replaced Kelix on Team Peps. So this is another team that I think is pretty highly rated. I think they should be one of the better teams as well. You just think kind of look at who's on this roster. Lots of talent on this roster. Lots of Overwatch League guys. They had a disappointing run in 2019. They finished in the top 10, but they were one of the bottom teams in that top 10. But they still were in the top 10. I think you have a little bit more high-end talent this time around. I think this roster should be a little bit better. I think the 2019 roster was a lot of guys kind of on their way out. Kib was kind of not a phenomenal player during his stint in the Overwatch League. Fusions, I think we've kind of seen him reach his peak. Boombox is kind of on his way out. Cruz was on his way out. But you had guys like KSP, who's now Kai, who now maybe he's on his way out, so this might be his last big thing. But in 2019, he was kind of at his peak. Funny Astro, he's now kind of in his peak. So it's an interesting roster. It's a lot of younger talent now. You know, Smex, Kai, and Funny Astro are the only ones who've been on the World Cup stage before. So it's a very interesting look. The head coach is Christopher, which I think is a huge benefit for this team. He's a very, very good coach. We saw how good he was in the World Cup, or in the Overwatch League last season, so I certainly think this team should be pretty good. But I do think this is a tough group in general, and I think you have to be consistently really, really good to kind of get out of this group. So I like this team a lot. I think they're another one of those favorites to get out of this group. They're certainly competing to be one of the top teams, and they have a lot of big names on there to really kind of get them to potentially get there, which is what you really want to see. Next team that we have is Team Italy. They're actually the last team to announce their roster for this World Cup. So it's about time. We finally have it. So they are going to be consisting of Andrew, who is a tank player, Yokino Shita and Chimera, who are 2 damage dealers, Kate Comey or Kata Comey, and Freyu 1600, who are supports. And then the 2 subs are both, as far as I'm aware, tank players, Rajaon and Ali or Ali. This is an interesting roster to look at. Not a lot of big names in terms of history in the kind of contender scene and the Overwatch League scene. A lot of kind of smaller, kind of unknown players on this team. So they definitely are one of the ones that I think are in an interesting position to watch. They are not one of the ones that I would expect to be favorites to get out of this group. I think they're probably on the lower end in terms of the kind of teams here, just because this group is very, very competitive. And I think this is one of the most interesting and competitive groups in the entire World Cup when you just look at the teams in there, right? There's 4 teams in this group, assuming Denmark makes it out of the wild card, that were top 10 in the 2019 World Cup. So 40% of the top 10 teams from the last World Cup are in this one group. So this is a very competitive group. You have to be really, really, really good to get out of this group. So I think Italy is an interesting team to look out for because they're going to be a dark horse if they want to get out of this group. They have to be really, really good. They have to outplay a lot of really good teams to get out of this group. And that, to me, is really the challenge that I think they are going to run into. Is this is a tough team, and it's not one that or a tough group, and it's not one that I think you can look at and say, oh, they're like an easy lock or anything like that. To me, there's no guaranteed team out of this group in general. I genuinely don't think there is a single team here that I look at and go, oh, this is easily, the team is going to get out of this group. I don't think that's the case, right? So we're looking at a super competitive group. So Team Italy is going to have to be really, really good to get out of this group, as will every team. That is, I think, where their biggest challenge is going to come from. Italy, not known for having tons of really high-end talent in the Overwatch League. I don't think any player from Italy has been in the Overwatch League. I could be wrong, but as far as I can remember, nobody from Italy has made it to the Overwatch League in the past. So it's a very, very, very tough group, and this Italy team is going to have a lot kind of on their plate to try to get out of it. But they're an interesting team for sure, and they're one that if you look at kind of where they go, 2019 they didn't do terribly. You kind of look at how they did. In order to get into the kind of preliminary tournament in 2019, you had to kind of play through a bracket. It was a very interesting format back in 2019. And Italy was not a terrible team. They beat India, they beat Japan, and they ultimately fell to Sweden, who then qualified, right? So they got very, very close to going all the way and to making it into that group. They just didn't quite have what they needed to get there. And so it's tough to kind of judge and tell sometimes, but it'll be interesting to see. I think this is a team that is a dark horse team. I think when you look at what they did in 2019, they weren't terrible. They were pretty good, but getting top 4 in this group or top 3 in this group is going to be very, very difficult. So, yeah, just something to keep in mind with this group and with this team. But let's talk about one of the rosters that I think is the most interesting, which is the Netherlands, who, of course, were one of the big dark horse teams that did very, very well in 2019. They finished in the top 10, I think they finished in that like 5-6 spot, so they were one of the best teams in the last World Cup, and it was kind of a surprise. But they were led by Casares, who of course is now the head coach of the Toronto Defiant, and they're returning quite a few guys from that team. Don was on that team, he's back. A10 was on that team, he's back. But then a lot of guys on this team are not from that roster. You have A10, Pastor, and Tap as your damage trio. You have Don and Krondop as your tanks, and you have ANJ and Buddy as your supports. And these are guys who a lot of them have some kind of history in contenders or whatnot. Don obviously was in the Overwatch League for a time with the Paris Eternal. Tap is a guy who right now is in Collegiate. Don and Krondop right now are both in contenders. Krondop on Team Peps, Don on Munich Esports. ANJ is on Triple Esports, and Buddy is on Sovereigns EU. So a lot of contenders talent and an Overwatch League head coach. So those are the two things that I look at with this team. And I go, they are certainly one of the teams in contention for making it to that top 3 spot. They are one of the, in my opinion, 4 best teams in this group. And you look at it, I think that they have a very real possibility of getting there. If you look at how they got there in 2019, it was very interesting, right? They automatically made it into the semifinals in their group. They beat Saudi Arabia and they beat Finland to qualify. So Finland has historically been a very good team. They dominated Finland. They beat Saudi Arabia 3-1. So this is a pretty good team, from 2019 that is back. And I think their roster is once again very, very good. I like a lot of their players. I think when you have a really good coach and some talent, and you have some guys who have experience and have history, been around for a bit, it's a good roster. So I do have a ton of faith in this Netherlands roster to be at least competing for one of those top 3 spots. I love a lot of this team's roster. I love what they have. So I think it's very interesting to kind of look at. I think they're going to be one of the potential favorites to get out of the group. Not necessarily a guarantee to get out of the group, but I certainly think that there's some high potential for them to get out of the group. The final guaranteed team in this group is Spain. You can see their roster here. They have Hyra, Lauren, Crazy Dragon as their damage trio. They have Helv and Heaven as tanks, and they have Gala and Kenale as their supports. A lot of these guys are coming from the team Ataraxia. Hyra, Helv, Kenale. Helv, been around for a very long time. Historical kind of guy. He's been around in the league for a while. So this is a team where a lot of these players have played with each other and they've come together recently. My guess is to try to build up some synergy for this World Cup, try to get things together. Helv historically was on Team Switzerland. I know he's Swiss and Spanish, so he's been able to play for both of them. This time around, he's playing on Team Spain. I wouldn't be surprised if it's because Team Spain is an automatic qualifier. He doesn't have to play in any kind of wild card. So there's some good players on this team. Lots of players that I think if you look at, you can see really the kind of strengths of these guys and why they kind of put them together. This is another one of those teams in a similar boat to Italy where I think they certainly could get out of this group. It is a tough group, though. They would have to really, really, really kind of do their thing. In the 2019 World Cup preliminaries, they lost to Norway in the semifinals. That was the only game they played. So that's a tough one. Like, Norway's a good team historically, so it's tough to kind of judge it. Obviously, it's a different roster this time around. It's not the same in any capacity, but I think this is a team that could do some stuff and could definitely make some waves as a part of this World Cup. But it's a very, 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 very tough group, and I think that they're one of those teams as well that for them to get in, they're going to have to be really, really good. They are going to have to beat a lot of really good teams. A lot of groups, and we'll talk about it more with a lot of these other groups that we have. In a lot of other groups, there's like 1 or 2 teams that are pretty much guaranteed to get out of their group. I don't think there's really a guaranteed team here, just because there's so much competition here. And so while I think there are 4 teams that realistically 3 of those 4 should move on, you never really know. So Spain's in a tough group, right? There's no guarantee this team moves on. But I think that they have what you like to see. They have a lot of players who are going to be focusing on grinding together, kind of playing together, working to kind of build synergy before the World Cup. And I think that helps create a team that when it comes to the World Cup itself here in the next couple of months, they have the potential to actually play above what we expect of them. So they're a very interesting team, and I think that they are going to be one of the ones that I have my eyes on just based on what they have on this roster. But they certainly are one of the ones that I feel is in a pretty tough spot. So those are the 6 teams that are guaranteed to be in this group. But like I said, there are 3 wild card teams here, 2 of which will move on to the main group. The first of which is Denmark. This Denmark team is really good. This Denmark team should pretty easily make it out of the wild card. Much like the Netherlands in the 2019 World Cup, they also finished in the top 6 of the World Cup. And they got there with wins over Taiwan and Australia in the preliminaries. And then, of course, getting into the top 6 meant having to beat teams like, I don't remember exactly which group they were in. They were actually second in their group with, they were behind China, they were ahead of the Netherlands, they were ahead of Russia, they were ahead of Canada. So they're really, really good in 2019, and I think they're even better now. I really like this roster. They have Shockwave, Naga, Shax as the damage trio, 3 Overwatch League veterans, Doge and Mulfig, 2 Overwatch League veterans in the tank line, and then Kelix and Slay as the supports. An Overwatch League veteran in Kelix and Slay, who looked very good on Twisted Minds this past year and in the Pro-Am. So this team is loaded. This might be the best team in this group, and they're a wild card team. So when I tell you this is a competitive group, I mean even the wild card team might be better than some of the other teams in the region. So it's very, very, very tough to look at this team and not think this team has what it takes to potentially go the distance, because they really are a special team with a lot of really talented players, guys with World Cup experience as well. They have Fischer as their coach, who was one of the players in 2019. So this is a good team. This is a really, really good team. I think they're probably one of my favorites to get out of this group in general. I certainly think they will have no trouble getting out of the wild card. I think they're better than Ireland and Portugal, who are the other 2 teams in this wild card. Speaking of Ireland, let's move on to that roster. You can see their team here. They have a damage trio of Castlerea, Faith, and Synex, and then they have tanks Ailisu and Pure Irish, and supports GCB and Nut. This team did not play great in the 2019 World Cup preliminaries. They got pretty quickly eliminated in a 3-0 loss to Iceland, who then got pretty quickly rolled by the United Kingdom. So this is a tough kind of team to kind of look at in terms of what they've done in the past. Pure Irish, someone who was on the team in 2019. I believe he's the only person on this team who was on the team back then. Ailisu, another kind of main big name player here, who is on Triple Esports. I think one of the more surprising players who I think people would have maybe expected to be here that's not is Grathen. Of course, Grathen is a very, very well-known player who's playing, I believe, right now on Redbird Esports. It might be Saints, but I think it's Redbird that Grathen is on. Not on this team, though, right? So I think this team should be favorited to get second in this group. I feel better about this team than I do Portugal, but I definitely think that they are behind Denmark in terms of overall talent, overall level of play. I think they're interesting. I think they're a good team to kind of look at. I would love to see Ireland do well because I think they have one of the best social presences of any of the World Cup teams. They did in 2019. I think they're still doing a pretty good job here. They played a show match, I think. I don't remember who they played, but I'm pretty sure I think it was Turkey. And then I think they got rolled. But I could be wrong. I don't remember exactly what happened. But it's an interesting team, right? A lot of unknowns, once again, with a couple of somewhat known players here. I know people are very, very excited about Synex. I'm not super familiar with him, but someone who I know people are very, very high on. And then the final team in this group is Portugal. Their roster consists of Kuhen, Karama, and Flamenzo on damage, HK3 and Ego1 on tank, and Dizzle and Rod FD on support. Another team where you're looking at a bunch of players who are not super well known. in the kind of competitive, professional contender / Overwatch League scene. They had Gray in the past, of course. He's one of the few people on this from Portugal who's made it to the Overwatch League. I think he's the only one. But a lot of the players in this team, once again, relative unknowns in the kind of overall big picture. I mean, like outside of EU, a lot of these players are not super well known. And I'm not from EU, so I don't know a lot of these players. So this is going to be another team that's going to have a tough time getting out of this wild card. I think especially, Denmark should be favorited. I think they should get out of the wild card pretty easily. Then it comes down to who's the best between Ireland and Portugal. I think it's pretty close. I would favor Ireland right now. I think they have a little bit higher end talent. And I think in the World Cup, that matters a lot, how well you are in terms of talent, because there's way more disparities in talent, I think, during the World Cup. So it's tough. This is a very tough group, like I said before. And it's why I think this group is so hard to even just predict, because there's so many good teams here. And it's really, really, really tough. So if I had to guess who my picks are, I'm not going to say 3 definitive teams for this group because I simply can't. But I think you're looking at 3 of France, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Denmark are probably the top 4 teams in this group. 3 of those teams should move on. They all finished in the top 10 in the last World Cup. They all played very well in the last World Cup. And so what we're looking at right now is a team or a group with just such talented individuals and such talented players that it's a really, really competitive group. So I think this is probably the most exciting group in terms of just like competitiveness. I think this is the closest group. You have a ton of really good teams. Any team, I think, realistically, can take games off of each other. And when you get games like France versus UK, Netherlands versus Denmark, France versus Denmark, any of those combinations, we're going to have some bangers of matches. And I think because of how competitive it's going to be, there's a very real possibility that a team that we rate very highly, like say the UK or France, maybe they go 0-3 against those other really good teams. And it's all super close matches because it's just that competitive of a group. And so it's all going to come down to being just that much better than the teams in the group. So I think this is probably the single best group in the entire World Cup. 3 teams can move on. 4 of them were top 10 in the last World Cup. A lot of really good talent across the group, even outside of those top 4 teams, right? So this is a super interesting group, a super exciting group, and I'm very interested to see what happens here. Let me know your thoughts down below if you think there's a guaranteed lock on this group, whatever. Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, I think this is a phenomenal group. I think it's a super fascinating group. I think it's one of the most interesting groups, and I think that it is the one that I'm most excited to actually watch when the World Cup does kick off. But like I said, I want to hear from you in the comments down below. I want to hear what you think about it. The things you think look good, the things you think look bad, whatever it is. Let me know. This video is already long enough, so I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all once again for watching. If you enjoyed and want more videos like this in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But that's all for me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.